Our presentation is going to be done on the Mary Payne fire in Seattle, Washington. We're just going to start out with a brief history of the fire, a couple key issues that went wrong, and what can be done to improve upon that. So the fire was initiated on January 5th, 1995 in Seattle, Washington at 815 7th Avenue. Full first alarm was initiated, which 5 engine companies, 2 ladder companies, 1 BLS ambulance, 1 medic ambulance, 1 air supply unit, and 2 commanding officers responded to the fire.
Again, I would like to point out that the fire was set in the storage room shortly before it quickly grew to major proportions within the storage room and burned through the wooden frame partition into the area occupied by the bakery.
The fire did result in 4 firefighter fatalities. Eventually, it triggered a 4th and 5th alarm after the fatalities, and it took a total of 72 hours from the onset of the fire until the last body was recovered. So here's a photo of where the building currently lies. Obviously, it's been rebuilt since the fire, but just put this in here to give you an idea of the 2 street corners that it lies on. So now going into some of the problems, what went wrong. Had some poor pre-incident planning as well as communication breakdown. And to really understand the issues with the pre-incident planning, you have to understand the history of the building. So it was over 85 years old. It was initially built as a wood frame, single-story building with a brick exterior and wood posts supporting a wood roof. It was initially just a 60-foot by 60-foot building. Then, however, in Seattle, between the years of 1905 and 1930, they had a project called the Seattle Regrade, in which they took hills and mountains that were in the north of the city, and they moved all that dirt, removed the mountains, and brought that dirt to the swampy, low-lying areas in the south of the city, which is where the Mary Payne building was situated. That then raised the level of the streets by 10 to 20 feet, which meant that the single-story building that initially was there was now going to be the basement of a building that could be built on top of that.
As for strategies, Engine 10 reported to the scene and assumed command at 19:07 hours. Engine 10 was then told to lay a 1 1/2 inch manifold. They were hooked up to the hydrant on the northeast corner. Battalion Chief 1 had made a command post on South Charles Street.
Engine 5 then went around back to the west side of the building, discovered that the building did have a basement. They made an interior attack and discovered that the fire had started in the basement. However, when this discovery was made, it sounds like communication never actually got made to Engine 10, who was on the first floor, as well as the other responding engines who were on the first floor, that were still unaware that there was indeed a basement below them with the fire in the basement.
Engine 13 was then assigned to work with Engine 10, and Engine 2 was then assigned to work with Engine 5 on the west side.
While the exterior attack from the west side and the interior attack from the east side continued, rooftop operations started to begin by Ladder Company 1. Once they were on the roof, they tried to get a good feel of where they could make their first ventilation cut. They could not make it directly over the fire due to the intense heat, so they actually moved more to the east side of the building based on the direction of the interior attack. Before they started to cut their trench hole, they were joined by 2 members of the BLS ambulance unit with an additional hose line, as well as a crew from Ladder Company 3. They began a north-south trench cut, which actually took a lot of time due to the construction of the building. There was 2 layers of roofing boards or roofing material. Once they got through the first layer, they actually had to reach down in between the joists with a chainsaw to open up that second layer to truly get a ventilation hole. So it took a lot more time than they anticipated, and it didn't really clear the heat out as fast as they wanted to. As the fire continued and we get more towards to when the floor actually collapsed, the 3 interior teams that were on the east side, the technical east side of the building, you have to understand that the north wing and the center section were 2 stories tall. But because they were even with the road, it seemed like they were also on the first floor as well as the west side. The west side was actually attacking the first story, while everyone attacking from the east side was on the second story building. But the confusion is that because they were street level, they were also on the first floor. This caused a massive amount of confusion and could have been mitigated with just simple communication. So as the interior lines from engines 7, 36, 10, and 3 were on that east side, they had no idea that they were actually on the second story and the fire was below them. And that's where that pony wall gave out. And you can see in this illustration how the actual floor was being held up, and that fire was weakening it the entire time. And then you can see how the collapse happened, and in the result was the 4 fatalities of the firefighters. With any incident, we always want to think that there's something that could have been done to prevent it, and there's a few things that we can look at. First and foremost, there was no initial 360 scene size up done. Engine Company 10 showed up and got to their offensive attack positions on the east side of the building. Now, if a 360 would have been done, they would have been able to set up on the west side, knowing that there was 2 stories. 1 story on the west side, and on the east side of the building, it was 2 stories tall. So communication-wise, anyone attacking on the west side continued to state that there was a fire on the first floor. When people from the east side were attacking, did not see a first floor fire because it was actually below them, but they had the mentality that they were also on the first floor. You can always put things to a lack of pre-incident planning. The FEMA report directly stated that without knowing the actual location of the pony wall, without previous knowledge of the pony wall, that this incident would not have been avoidable. A large part of this is also lack of communication. Lack of communication between both east and west side crews, as well as lack of progress reports. Multiple times the east side would enter a room and state that there was a lot of smoke but no flame, while on the west side they knew that all the flame was on the first floor. Again, going back to that confusion that all west side and east side buildings were on 2 different floors. A lot of things could have changed the outcome of the Mary Pang fire. It comes down to lack of communication, risk management, and attack strategy chosen. With well-developed communication, I think that the IC could have developed a more defensive attack approach. There was no immediate threat to life. There was no one in the building upon arrival. So I think a more defensive approach would have been appropriate. Stop the spread of fire to surrounding buildings, and simply mitigate the risk and make sure that everyone made it home that night.